Welcome back to Everybody Hates Your Brand, the podcast for all things marketing. This week, we're going back to school by talking to a professor of marketing. Professor Liu-Thompkins is our guest this week. She is a professor of marketing at Old Dominion University, which is located in Virginia in the US. She is also founder and director of Loyalty Science Lab, whose mission is to create and promote cutting-edge scientific research on brand and customer loyalty. They produce some phenomenal content in the loyalty space. Based on those credentials, I was expecting a fun interview, and that's exactly what I got. I hope you enjoy it. So, as I said in the intro, I am delighted to welcome Professor Liu-Thompkins to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, Rob. Great to be here.
Yes, thank you. It's really lovely to speak to you. We start every interview with what I call the credibility section. We have listeners. I'm very lucky to have listeners from all over the world. So it's essentially an introduction into you and your career, so the listener gets a context of who you are and where your opinions are coming from. So would you mind giving us a quick kind of review of your career and what you're currently doing, please?
Sure. I am, as you mentioned, I'm a professor of marketing and director of Loyalty Science Lab at Old Dominion University in Virginia, US. And I have personally been doing loyalty-related research over the past 20 years or so. So started with the convenience store industry and looking at the impact of loyalty programs, and then moved on to study larger topics in loyalty, such as, why are people loyal to companies, and differentiating across different types of loyalty drivers, such as the truly loyal customers versus the habitual customers, and also look at a lot of personalization communication issues within loyalty programs and applying behavioral science and human psychology to behaviors within loyalty. And then in the last 2 years or so, in 2020, I guess it's more than 2 years now, I started the Loyalty Science Lab at Old Dominion University. Really started as a mechanism for connecting academic research related to loyalty to a lot of the loyalty practitioners out there, kind of interchange ideas and spread the research around and just gather general feedback and create a positive energy for work in the loyalty area.
That's brilliant, yes, and I will make sure we link to the Loyalty Science Lab, your Medium articles, and all that kind of stuff in the podcast notes, because I found them hugely enlightening and hugely useful. You started with an interesting point there about different types of loyalty. So let's start by defining terms. When you discuss loyalty, what's your definition? When you talk about loyalty, what do you refer to? How are you defining it?
Loyalty is a really interesting concept in the sense that there is really no one single best definition of loyalty, right? And so when you talk to different people, they have very different ideas of what loyalty is. To me, I think loyalty has maybe two main different streams of aspects. So one is what companies use a lot is a behavioral definition of loyalty, right? So when we look at what makes a loyal customer is typically a customer who make repeated purchases over time. And so probably a long-term customer that spends quite a bit with the company and buys frequently. So that's our typical, from a behavioral point of view, of loyalty. But I think there's another much more inside look of what loyalty looks like from a feeling, from my attitude towards the company perspective. And that level of loyalty is really talking about feeling of a connection with the brand, having generally a very positive opinion and attitude towards the brand, or in the extreme form, you can really love a particular brand. So I think these two things are definitely connected for sure, but they're also quite different from where they're coming from, and one does not necessarily mean the other thing at the same time.
No, I completely agree with that. And I think it's an interesting lead into the idea of loyalty programs, which historically are about, I guess you would describe as a form of the transactional loyalty type, operant conditioning. You do something, we give you a reward, you do it again type stuff, versus emotional loyalty. Would you say emotional loyalty is more engendered to around the product, customer experience, the service? It's not so much about having a loyalty program is going to create emotional loyalty. It's a broader customer experience type relationship in a sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think that loyalty program, depending on the design, can definitely have some influence
Hmm.
on people's emotional loyalty. But it is, I would say, it's relatively rare to have emotional loyalty completely born out of a loyalty program. And so loyalty program has this ability to strengthen that, right? But the a lot of times that emotional loyalty is connected prior to joining a loyalty program or before you have extensive experience with it. So it's the product, it's the people you interact with from the brand, it's any social interactions you might have through maybe social media. It's like you said, the holistic brand experience, I would say, is what contributes more to that emotional loyalty component.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Let's let's talk about loyalty programs because I think there's a big debate around loyalty. I think in this, where we're just talking about in terms of if you said you were head of loyalty, does that give you the right to go and play around in things that maybe aren't marketing or those kind of things? But we'll come back to that one. In terms of loyalty programs specifically, one of the things that keeps coming up regularly, if you're familiar with Byron Sharp's work around loyalty and all that kind of stuff, is that do loyalty programs actually do what they say they're going to do? Do they engender loyalty? What does the academic research tell us about that?
Yeah, I would probably say that yes and no. When we look at the impact in terms of behavioral loyalty, I would say the evidence is pretty strong in supporting that loyalty program does increase people's behavioral loyalty. They buy more, they stay a little bit longer because of the loyalty program. They concentrate their purchases within fewer brands because of loyalty programs. And so, it's interesting that last year we did a future of loyalty study where we, polled basically about over 4,000 customers in four different countries around the world. And one of the things that we actually asked consumers is that, how does reward program or loyalty programs affect your loyalty decisions or your of interaction with brands. And so, roughly about 70, on average, across the four different countries, over 70% of the consumers said they stay with the brand longer, they feel more positive about the brand, and they also tend to buy more from the brand. To a lesser extent, they also say it affects where they buy from. And
Hmm.
so, not only do we actually see behavioral changes created by loyalty programs, but consumers seem to be aware and they are factoring that into their purchase decision based on the responses we received. And but I will say that how much of an impact it makes really is very diverse. We saw big differences across different age groups, across different countries. The And one of my first project, actually research projects in the loyalty area, was related to, I mentioned earlier, a convenience store loyalty program, looking at the impact. And from that study, I found that a lot of the heavy buyers already at the store were making minimal changes to their behavior, right? But versus the light buyers and the medium buyers are the one that we really saw
Mm.
a significant increase in their behavioral loyalty toward the program.
Yeah, and I think
Sorry,
that's an
toward
interest.
the company, I should say.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing when you talk about business cases for loyalty programs. Is where are those extra purchases going to come from? Who are you going to give benefits to that were going to come in already anyway? That's always a fun number to try and figure out as somebody who's built business cases on this kind of stuff. That's always a fun thing to try and figure out. You mentioned interesting there, brand versus scheme. What does the research in relation to sort of loyalty to a scheme versus loyalty to a brand, if that makes sense? You know,
Yeah, absolutely. There's always been a debate, I think, even in academia, about what does loyalty program really do, right?
yeah.
Does it basically make people really loyal to the program itself? So if you pull the program one day, everybody will just leave, or are you actually generating that long-term loyalty towards your company? And so it's an interesting question. It's actually a question that we're trying to answer with one of our current projects. And
Ah.
so I'm working with an affiliated researcher in Belgium, and what we are looking at is basically the gap between the two loyalty that you just talked about. So the loyalty towards the program itself versus the loyalty towards the company, and we're essentially linking that over time. So we observe that from loyalty program members, and actually over time, and we link that to their behavior within the program to see, do we observe some kind of pattern to say what kind of consumers actually becomes more loyal to the program itself, and what is more towards the company. And so, of course, not very surprisingly, that for people who earn very little and also, don't really redeem much of what they have earned, those individuals are generally not see much of an impact in either of these loyalty measures, right? But for people who are either high earners or people who redeem a high percentage of the points or rewards they received, those are individuals actually we see a shrinking gap, in the sense that the company loyalty is growing faster than what the
Hmm.
program loyalty is. So because a lot of situations actually the program loyalty is tend to be higher. So as your company loyalty kind of catches up to that initial loyalty to the program, then it kind of shrinks the gap between the two things. What's surprising from that research is that people who earn a lot and redeem a lot tend to be the ones actually become mostly loyal to the program, and their company loyalty really lags behind.
Interesting. It's interesting that point around brand versus scheme. Well, I used to work for a big video game retailer, the GameStop equivalent in the UK called Game, and one of the things we always talked about was that a loyalty program can't make up for a bad brand or a bad customer experience. It can be a differentiator if you're kind of in the same neighborhood as your competitor.
I agree.
And that's something you would agree with.
Yeah. I would agree. I think that loyalty program run well can be a differentiator and can definitely strengthen the brand proposition. But it's too often, I think what we see in the world is really just a points accumulation program, and it doesn't
Hmm.
much of anything else other than a maybe dignified form of discount.
Dignified form of discounting. I love that. I'm stealing that. That's very good. Um, so you talked about convenience. I've come across loyalty programs in my own career in terms of retail, QSR, quick serve restaurant, fast food restaurant type situation. When does and when doesn't it make sense to have a loyalty program? And I'm thinking specifically on the characteristics of a brand or characteristics of an industry, a category, where they do work versus some where it's really difficult to make them work.
Well, I think that the when you look at the different sectors, there were actually two fairly recent, over the last couple of years, of large scale research studies done on loyalty program effectiveness, and specifically not necessarily looking at individual responses, but looking at from a firm level in terms of sales, in terms of profit, does it make a difference? I think in the grocery retail sector, they saw a smaller portion of the companies actually benefited from their loyalty programs in terms of sales and profit perspective. But in many other industries, whether that's telecommunication, travel, and other industries, there's actually a substantial amount of lift coming from loyalty programs. So I would say that given the diverse possibility of achieving different goals with loyalty programs, it does have a applicability, I should say,
Mm.
to in many different sectors. But I will say that depending on the sector you're in, depending on the kind of brand you are, depending on what it is, the goal that you want to reach, your loyalty program should be looking very different, right? So a lot of times when we think about it, is, you earn a certain number of points per dollar, and then you get some rewards at the end. That's the backbone of the loyalty program. But really, there's so much more than go beyond that. What
Mm.
do you hand over as rewards? What do you reward as the behavior, and so forth? So I think in a lot of industries, I will also say that it's so saturated with loyalty program that sometimes even in your mind you don't necessarily want one, or are not
Mm.
sure you actually need one, but from comparability perspective, you might have to do it in a way for not losing customers to other
Mm,
companies that have that. So sometimes it's also a forced choice for you. But I do think that in any of these cases, if you do decide to have a loyalty program, the most important thing to really think about is what it is that you really want it to do for you. And then to design your program, manage your program according to that objective.
I would agree with that because I think a lot of loyalty programs, I mean, a lot of those airline programs make most of their money selling points wholesale, don't they? In terms of selling its credit cards, and that's a huge revenue stream. At Game, we used to not sell, we used to sell insight. So if you were Activision or Electronic Arts or any of those big video game retailers, we knew what games your customers were buying, what other stuff they were buying, and we could package that up as a product essentially and sell it to suppliers. So I think
Mhm.
loyalty programs unlock more than just the idea of the loyalty effect, that the odds of that next purchase coming back to you. I think that's the bit I think a lot of people miss when they're thinking about loyalty programs, is those other revenue streams you can maybe pull out of a loyalty program.
Absolutely. And I think, the even in the case where you don't necessarily sell that information to the supplier, there are a lot of opportunities once you have that data, crunching that data yourself, finding customer
Absolutely.
insight, and use that information to inform your marketing practice or your
Yeah.
product strategy. I think there's a lot of value can be derived from that.
100% agree on that. Um, so you talked about different industries and different programs fitting into different categories and all that kind of stuff. So there are a million variables you could consider if you're from a sort of mechanics perspective of a program. There's a lot of programs that are now paid for. So I think about Amazon Prime as the obvious example, but there's a great cycling brand called Rafa, who do Rafa Cycling Club, which is amazing. There are a couple of other different ones. I think Lululemon tried a paid for one for a while. You've got things like, is it open or closed invite? Is it points? Is it not? Has anybody done any kind of meta-analysis or work academically to kind of go, actually, I'm going to predict your answer is, it depends. But is there any research that's in there about, okay, this actually does have an impact, this doesn't have an impact, you should stay away from this, and you should definitely do that? Is there any universal rules, or does it come down to it depends?
Well, I don't think the amount of evidence that we have accumulated so far is enough to say this is a universal rule at this point. But I will say that the two large scale studies that I mentioned earlier, across different industries, this is study across a few hundred loyalty programs and looking at their impact. So what they have found, in the studies, a few things that stands out as having an impact. One, for example, is what you mentioned earlier about whether there's a fee for joining or not.
Yep.
And generally, they found that programs that actually require fee had a bigger impact on sales and profit compared with the programs that does not require a fee. And I think that's understandable. People pay for
Mm.
something; they're more likely to actually utilize it.
Yeah, loss
The
aversion. You don't want to feel like you wasted that money, do you?
Exactly. And multi-tiered program were found to be more effective than the single tier type of program. And this is, of course, across the entire sample as a general kind of conclusion. There's one thing about reward, progressive reward versus constant reward. So when you look at whether it takes longer and longer to kind of reach for a reward, that's the more kind of progressive structure versus the
Mm-hmm.
ones that are generally at a constant speed. The research also found that constant speed to work a little bit better than progressive reward. I think probably partly because how complex the program
Mm.
gets as you kind of get involved into it. And there are a few other things they found that did not have an impact, at least from the few hundred programs that were studied. One was whether the reward was related to the program or not.
Mm.
Sorry, the reward was related to the company or not. Like,
Right.
for example, you can give a gift voucher for your own company versus gift voucher to get consumer experience somewhere else. That actually did not have an impact. There are some select factors that did not have as much impact.
Yeah.
But I will say this, that based on my own personal experience with my own research, what I've seen there is that a lot of times it's always consumer specific. right? So there are, for example, when you think about monetary versus non-monetary reward, some of those type of rewards are just going to work better with some customers than
Mm.
others. And so there is a need to kind of consider that heterogeneity of consumer preferences, when you are thinking through these different design factors.
Yes, some of the one things we're talking about with our clients at the agency I'm working at currently is around customization or personalization of rewards. Like how much choice should the members or consumers, however you want to describe them as members of your program, have in terms of their ability to, can I choose that reward? Can I choose that reward? How much play can I have? Is that kind of element of personalization of rewards something that people are moving towards? Is that something you're seeing?
I think that personalization is definitely the direction that we're moving toward. I will also say that the right kind of personalization does not necessarily have to increase the complexity for consumers, right?
Mm.
The point of personalization is that instead of dealing with 200 different potential choices, that you are presented with maybe like 10 things that you really actually have an interest in.
Mm.
So I think that personalization is hopefully will reduce that kind of choice overload type of situation and avoid having too complex type of programs or reward structures for people to
Yeah.
have to kind of struggle with.
And that point on complexity, do you think there's I don't know, I think a compulsion sometimes that people want to try and overcomplicate the mechanics of a program because maybe it gives them more flexibility, or they feel like it's giving the customer more choice, or whatever it is. I mean, I'm guessing from research, a level of simplicity is super important, and there's a tipping point beyond which you're kind of like, people start to just go, this is too much, I'm going to switch off from this program because there's too many choices or too many things.
There's a complexity that definitely can be a barrier. I would say that our future of loyalty study, one of the things that we ask consumers is, about their behavior in terms of engagement with loyalty programs. So there's a subsample of the consumers that we talked with that said, I don't use loyalty program at all. I don't use
Mm-hmm.
reward programs at all. So we asked a follow-up question and, essentially asking them, why did you not use it? So roughly about one fifth, about 20% of those people basically cited that these programs are too confusing or difficult to use.
Right.
And so, when you think about from a complexity standpoint, consumers are telling us that I don't like things that when it gets too complicated. And I'm really a big fan of Occam's razor, right? So you wanted to, achieve your goals with the least number of variations possible. I think what programs are really thinking about with designing a complex program is to accommodate the needs of many different consumers because most companies are dealing with a very different set of consumer cohorts. But I do think that you cannot be everything to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about what is really the goal that you want to achieve in the program, right? If you are creating the program mostly to capture customer data,
Mm-hmm.
you might need only a very simplistic structure of what you need to do. If you need to engage consumers emotionally, kind of foster that more emotional loyalty or sense of community, then your complexity may be coming in from how you engage or interact with them, what kind of rewards you give them, and so forth. So not every program needs to have this full on complex design for everything. And I think what we said earlier about personalizing program, and I think programs may be working towards that direction in the next couple of years, is that instead of having that one standard version for everyone, perhaps have more differentiated personalized versions that based on customer choice of what it is they want.
Yeah, and I think you were talking about behavioral science earlier. That kind of taps into the idea of co-creation, the IKEA effect. Applying more value to something that you've had a part in creating. And I think that's a really interesting, leads you an interesting point. Then the other bit about simplicity. One of the things we always try and say is, if you had to describe it in a sentence, what I get out of being a member of this program, what would you say? And so, if it's a points program, let's say it's Tesco Club Card because I'm in the UK, I spend money, I earn points, and I can spend those points on stuff, discounts, and whatever it might be. That's dead easy to explain to somebody. If you're another program and you don't have like a core benefit, but you've got a list of different 5 or 6. So Waitrose, again, is another supermarket in this country. Well, I get a free cup of coffee when I go in, and I get a free newspaper, and I get discounts sent to me, and do you know what I mean? There's no kind of thing you can hook into as a customer. Say, I get this. I think that's a really interesting thing from a marketing perspective of how you're marketing your program. What do I get? Well, if you've got 10 minutes, sit down and I'll tell you. It doesn't really work.
Mhm.
I think the other interesting thing that's happening a lot, and we're seeing this in our clients, is the demise of cookies. There's a real drive for zero-party data, a real drive for first-party data. That people are, you talk about why should you have a loyalty program, especially if you've got bricks and mortar and you're not just an online business. That seems to be a more of a driver for starting to, maybe not full-scale loyalty programs, but certainly capturing customer data and those kind of things. Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we mentioned earlier about loyalty program being a mechanism for capturing customer data,
Mm-hmm.
and when these third party cookies and all of that is going away, it's going to accentuate the ability of loyalty programs to be able to do that. And what also helps with that situation is that a lot of times consumers are also willing to for companies to deal with data from a loyalty program perspective. In our study, we had seen that when we asked consumers, we gave consumers a pretty long list of potential information that companies can use to customize the brand experience for them, and we asked consumers, out of these types of information, which ones are you willing to kind of let companies use? And the top two, one was purchase history, and the
Okay.
second one was reward program status. And so when you really think about the kind of data that loyalty program captures, exactly those two things. And so from that perspective, loyalty program will definitely alleviate some of that concern, at least for, I would say, for the average consumer. There are some very privacy concern conscious customers that you are probably not going to be able to convince them. What I mentioned earlier about the people who never really use any loyalty programs, when we asked them the reason, one major reason, about I would say 25% of those people who'd never use it says they don't want their purchase to be tracked.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't want to leave a trail.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think it's a really interesting space there's a lot of people looking at their data now, working with media buyers and sellers to, use that data within programmatic or those different areas. I think it's a really interesting space. Last question on loyalty. You must obviously spend a lot of time looking at different loyalty programs, different loyalty mechanics and constructs and all those kind of things from across the world. Is there anything innovative or truly interesting that you're finding particularly exciting, or a trend towards a certain thing? What is it about the sort of future of loyalty that you're seeing that looks exciting or interesting to you?
Well, I can think about a few things. I would say that, I think loyalty program, after having been run for a few decades now,
Hmm.
within a similar sort of structure, maybe with some complexity involved over the last 10, 20 years, we're probably on the cusp of change at this point, with a lot of companies are thinking about now that, one is in terms of dealing with the cost of loyalty programs, how are we going to do this forward, particularly with the risk of inflation, and so forth. How are we going to engage our best customers such that loyalty program would actually do something for the best customers in those kind of situations. The newer things that I find to be interesting, one, I would say, is the application of loyalty program outside of the typical commercial space. What I mean by that is using loyalty programs to try to achieve social good, right?
Hmm.
And because there's a lot of behavioral science, human motivation, and goal pursuit type of things behind loyalty programs, and typically we think of them as a very commercial tool, but there's really a lot more application of it that can happen outside of the commercial space. And so you see, there are already some programs out there are specifically designed to, kind of encourage sustainable behavior, or
Hmm.
support for charity, and social poverty, and those type of things already. even existing programs, like for example, Qantas Airlines, with their frequent flyer programs, they already have a green tier in the program where you can reward customers bonus points for engaging, like booking eco-friendly hotels, for installing solar panels, just a variety of different sustainable behaviors. You can get extra points, but you can also redeem your points for carbon offset as well.
Right.
So I think existing programs are already aware of the potential for doing that, and particularly when we see with our studies of consumer in the younger group are particularly concerned about these kind of issues. So I think to make a program more meaningful to the younger customer segment, I think it's important to integrate that kind of practices into existing programs, and we will see significant impact from it because how it drives people's behaviors.
Interesting.
So that's one thing I find quite exciting, for
Hmm.
us to be seeing in the loyalty program space.
That's great. Well, let's ask the reverse question. Well, kind of the reverse question. So here at Everybody Hates Your Brand, we have what we call the Marketing Room 101. So if anybody's read 1984, it's the thing that you're most scared of in the world. But it ended up becoming a TV show in the UK. And celebrities were asked to come onto the show and say, okay, what things do you find particularly annoying? And then they would get put into room 101, locked away forever in purgatory. So we ask every person who comes on to be interviewed onto this show, if you could pick one thing about loyalty or marketing or business or hell, even academia, given who I'm talking to, what are you putting into Everybody Hates Your Brand room 101 and why?
Ooh, can I put a category of things in there?
Yeah, go on.
Um,
Let's hear.
yeah, the I would probably say pushy sales tactics. That
That's
would
fair.
be, my pet peeve. I've never really liked pushy salespeople
Hmm.
as a consumer, and I think translating to the online world, we see a lot of that happening as well. Automated messages that are down the sales channel that keep harassing you when you
Hmm.
don't respond. They pretend to have that personal frustration about that you have not responded and trying to guilt you into responding. So none of that, I think, it's really a very effective tactic and actually makes consumer more likely to want to run away from you. I'm very passionate about loyalty, and I think
Hmm.
that even as you acquire customers, you really need to have that long-term customer loyalty in mind. The question is, when you using these kind of pushy sales tactics, how much are you really gaining a long-term customer rather than just that one single transaction?
Yeah.
So definitely my thing to put into the classroom.
Well, I can't argue with that. That goes into Everybody Hates Your Brand's Marketing Room 101. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been hugely interesting to hear it from. I've been in loyalty for a long time. I've had other people come on the guests who've been loyalty practitioners, but to hear the academic side of it and to get your perspective has been really illuminating. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, you are very welcome. It's very nice chatting with you, Rob.
I hope that was as engrossing to listen to as I found it to do. Some real nuggets of wisdom there. I have posted several links in the show notes to the work being done by the Loyalty Science Lab, and I strongly encourage you to seek them out. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing on your platform of choice or leaving a review. And until next time, as my mum always says, take great care and be vigilant out there.